as that journey progresses, she tries to figure out who he is. She has a few more other discoveries to make as well, as you might guess. I won't spoil it exactly, but spoiler, she's not heterosexual, and she'll discover that along the way. But hi, I'm Ketevan. I want to share with you some of the queer books that I've enjoyed lately. And as I was putting together the list, I realized that a lot of them are actually more international or world literature. I'm doing a Read Around the World challenge, so a lot of them are from that. But I realized I have 8 books here from around the world, and so I thought I'd share those 8 with you. So let's just get into it. The first one I have here is The Man Who Wore His Wife's Sarong, Stories of the Unsung, Unsaid, and Uncelebrated in Singapore. So I selected this for my Singapore pick back in January. I follow the Invisible Cities project. If you don't know what that is, it's a Read Around the World collaborative between a lot of YouTubers and book bloggers, I believe, and they pick 2 countries every month to read from. And so Singapore was one of their selections for January. In January, I picked out this book, ordered it, and because I live in France, it didn't get here until the end of February. So I lost a bit of my momentum on that, and I didn't read it back then. So this is the one book on this list that I haven't read yet. I'm reading it right now for Pride. Really enjoying it so far. It's by Suchen Christine Lim. And she's a winner of, the first winner actually, of the Singapore Literature Prize, which is really cool. Now, normally I don't really enjoy reading books written by cishet authors about queer characters. That usually just kind of, not necessarily bad, I just don't tend to enjoy them as much. But in this case, I made an exception because all I knew about Singapore was that it's a very restricted government, all the way from making chewing gum illegal to being gay is also illegal and prosecuted actively. So I can understand why maybe queer writers aren't able to live in Singapore and produce quality work without being persecuted or at least targeted in some way for that. And so their safety is more important. So it actually, this whole collection came about because I'm guessing Suchen Christine Lim, she as a member of a very open and liberal and tolerant church, because the bishop of that church asked her to write a short story about a gay man coming out to his family set in Singapore. And she did. She read it out in a church service and everyone loved it. And then the lesbians in the church wanted her to write a story about them, and it sort of just snowballed into this little collection here. And I've only read a couple stories so far, but they're very good. I'm learning a lot about Singaporean culture and sort of how the effects of colonization and also just like post-colonization development also like can marginalize some groups of people in an attempt to better life for maybe other groups of people. And I'm not 100% sure if all of these are about queer characters. I believe some of them are, about other forms of marginalization. So like there's an HIV positive story in here and a sex worker story, or a story with a sex worker as the protagonist. Yeah. And so it's not just queer stories, but there are, I think the majority are queer, and I'm really looking forward to finishing this and getting through more of these stories because they're really, really fun. Well, not all of them are fun, but it's an enjoyable read so far. So next up we have the Iliac Crest by Cristina Rivera Garza, translated from the Spanish by Sarah Booker. This is a Mexican novel, and novella really, actually, it's very short. And it's the story of a man who, he works for a hospital, lives in a house on the property of the hospital, middle of nowhere, sort of spooky and mysterious, but these exist, I suppose. And one stormy night, 2 women knock on his door. One of them is his ex-lover. The other one claims to be a Mexican writer, Amparo de Villa. And he just accepts that, and they declare that they're staying with him now, and he also sort of accepts that, and he's not sure why, but he also feels like he can't say no. And as they stay longer and longer, he becomes more and more uncomfortable, and they claim that he is not in fact a man, but rather a woman. And this is very discomforting to him. He believes himself to be a cis man, and he has never questioned that before. And now that they have sort of boldly stated that he's in fact a woman, he's questioning it more and more, and is very confused. And the more he tries to prove that he's a man, the more he realizes he cannot actually do that. And it's not spooky or scary in a traditional way, but on the front, actually, it says here, an intelligent, beautiful story about bodies disguised as a story about language, disguised as a story about night terrors. And I think that's actually a perfect summary, because it does feel a little bit like a nightmare, but it's not really about the nightmare. It's more about the underlying things that are happening. This covers a lot of different themes: sex, of course, gender, politics, death, dying, healthcare, things like that as well. Also, there's a metaphorical border that he keeps crossing between, I think, the North and the South, and that's sort of the metaphor for the US-Mexican border. So that part is also interwoven into the story. And then, of course, Amparo Davila is a very underrated Mexican writer who this author, Cristina Rivera Garza, wants to sort of use as a commentary about how women writers are sort of marginalized in the literary world. And so there's lots going on here, and you really never understand fully what's happening. And it is one of those books where you're so confused, but after I finished reading, I was still thinking about it for more than a month afterwards. So if that's not a rave review, I don't know what is. Really love this one. Highly recommend. Definitely need to reread it as well, because I think a reread would help me really fully absorb it and enjoy it. Alrighty, so next up we have, and for our next one, it is also a bit of a fever dream, but you do know what's going on. So it's Tentacle by Rita Indiana, translated also in Spanish, from the Spanish, by Achi Obejas, and this one is from the Dominican Republic. And Rita Indiana actually is more famous in the Dominican Republic as a DJ, and so she is sort of straddling the lines between the music and the writing world, or literary world, I should say. And she won the grand prize of the Association of Caribbean Writers, and she was actually the first Dominican writer to do that, so that was pretty cool. And so this book, Tentacle, what is Tentacle about? It is such a wild ride. You're very confused the whole time, but at the end you do understand what happened, and it is sort of all the different pieces of the story do come together at the end, and you do understand what had been happening the whole time. And that doesn't make it not blow your mind any less, because it definitely blew my mind. I really, really love the ending. It, throughout the book, the themes are presented very, very clearly, sex, class, race, gender, environmentalism. It's very punky in every way you can possibly think of. And at the end, the twist made you rethink all those themes even more. So what is Tentacle actually about? So it's about a maid, a Silde. She's actually a sex worker in the beginning, and then she becomes a maid, and she's doing all of this because she desperately wants to access this medication. This is in a dystopic future where we are told that there's a medication you can take, and within 24 hours after taking this medication, you go into a little bit of a coma, and during this coma, your body completely transforms from whatever the opposite sex. So she has a female body, and she would take the medication and it would turn her body into a male body. And, I read the back and it says only she can travel back in time to save the ocean and humanity from disaster, but first she must become the man she always was. And I don't know why my head just glossed over that, but from the very beginning, she's very clear, I'm a trans man, I desperately want this medication, I want to have my body reflect my gender, and I want to do it's not really sexual reassignment surgery, but sort of the futuristic version of that. But then as she gets sucked into the prophecy of this, it's a Santeria prophecy of that she's going to save the world, she, now that she's transitioned, I'll switch to he pronouns, so he, is able to time travel through the help of an anemone, where we get the tentacle and this gorgeous art cover from. And so this anemone is it's mysterious. We're not sure why or how it gets its powers, but essentially the anemone helps him to time travel. And I'll say I don't read a lot of sci-fi, I don't read a lot of time travel, but from what I gather, based on movies and TV, the logic and the physics of the time travel is actually really different. Bonjour. Coucou. Je viens. Ça va? Sorry about that. What was I just saying? Essentially, Tentacle is a super punky, super punchy, fast-paced, in the beginning very confusing, but it's super, super satisfying end. Well, maybe it's not satisfying, but it's a thought-provoking end, I'll say that. And it is incredibly well written, incredibly well translated as well. And I really, really loved it. I'm hoping to reread it to fully understand, like, or sort of see how everything was tied together even before I knew it was being tied together. And also, I cannot wait to read more from Rita Indiana. I love her work so much. I can't wait for more. Alrighty, so next we have La Bastarda by Trifonia Melibea Obono, and it's translated from the Spanish by Lawrence Schimmel. And this one is from Equatorial Guinea, and this is the first Equatorial Guinean female author to be translated into English ever, which I find wild, but there it is. I mean, Equatorial Guinea is a very tiny country, but still. And it's a very short novella. It's less than 100 pages, and it's about the story of a young teenage girl called Obono, who, as you might guess, her parents were not married when she was born. So she's a pseudo-orphan. Her mother died in childbirth, and because her father wasn't married to her mother, he didn't claim her. And everyone around her seems to know who her father is, but they won't tell her. They tell her it's not important, but because it's a patrilineal society, it's a Fang tribe, or she lives in a Fang tribe rather, and she wants to know who her father is. As she gets older, as she wants to figure out who she is, this is becoming more and more important to her. So the novella starts off with her sort of focusing in on that. And as that journey progresses, she tries to figure out who he is. She has a few more other discoveries to make as well, as you might guess. I won't spoil it exactly, but spoiler, she's not heterosexual, and she'll discover that along the way. But one of the main characters that she goes to for help is her uncle, Marcelo, who, for our Western lens, we would call him a gay man, and that's not the terminology he uses necessarily, but, you know, he is in a romantic and sexual relationship with a man, not interested in women. So his whole storyline is so much of an interesting commentary. I feel like it actually sometimes even overshadows the protagonist's journey, but it ties in together at the end very nicely, and I really enjoyed that. Essentially, Marcelo, he is a gay man who is largely actually left alone by his family and friends, and so he lives his life pretty happily. It's not what I would call the perfect gay existence, but considering what we normally hear about African gay life in Africa, it's much better than you would expect. He runs into a little bit of trouble, however, when his family calls on him to do a very specific thing for their lineage. So this family in general doesn't have a lot of male heirs, and the one heir that they have is very clear that he's infertile and he's not able to produce any children, which also I found very refreshing, because normally infertility problems are always immediately on the woman's fault, but in this case, he's had 3 different wives, and each time they can't get pregnant, they leave him, go find another man, and then they're able to get pregnant. So his family is very cognizant of the fact that it is his issue, and then the only culturally appropriate way to solve this problem is actually more open than ours, and it is to have another male family member impregnate his current wife. And that I find super fascinating from an anthropological perspective, but we won't go into that right now. But essentially he refuses, as you might guess, because he's a gay man and he's not interested in having sex with a woman, no matter how important that sex might be. I wouldn't say that this is a particularly sad story, even though sad things do happen. It's really very uplifting and positive, even though a lot of tragic things do happen. the writing is very punchy and abrupt, and actually and I read some reviews where that was sort of a complaint actually of many readers, but I actually appreciated it because it really felt real. Like, this is how a teenager would talk. They're very abrupt, they're very cut and dry. I always appreciate less flowery language, so maybe that's why I'm appreciating this style more. But it's a very quick paced, very easy to read, very short, and the ending, it's just so heartwarming and beautiful that I won't spoil it, but it's really, really quite lovely and highly recommend. So next up I have got Jonny Appleseed here by Joshua Whitehead. This one's Canadian, and for my Canadian reads and also any country where the population is largely white settlers instead of Indigenous folks, I'm only counting Indigenous authors for those countries. So I picked this up actually on a bit of a whim from my library on audiobook and loved it so much that I bought myself a hard copy afterwards, but I listened to the audiobook. And Joshua Whitehead actually is a Two-Spirit Ojibwe Cree person, and so I was, ready to put this onto my Read Around the World spreadsheet, and I realized I can't put him in the male author column. I do one female and one male author from each country. So I actually, this book inspired me to add a third column, and I'm going to try as hard as I can to get as many trans, gender non-conforming, maybe I'll expand it to queer in general authors, because this book was so great, and I realized I'm missing out on a lot if I'm not actively looking for the trans authors out there around the world. So to tell you a little bit about the plot, we follow Jonny, who is a sex worker living in the big city, far from where he grew up on the reservation, and he's just living his best life trying to make it work. And in the very beginning of the novel, we find out that his stepfather has passed away, and the funeral is in a few days, and he doesn't have the money to get there for the funeral, so he has to do a little bit of hustle and earn enough money to be able to get back. So the book is really just a series of the sex work that he does to earn money, and also him remembering his childhood, his life, and all the pieces that are fitting together and breaking apart. It's described on the back as a unique, shattering vision of Indigenous life, full of grit, glitter, and dreams. And I think the grit, glitter, and dreams is actually a perfect description of this. It's so beautifully written. It's so heartbreaking, but also uplifting at the same time. And it's just such a beautiful story. And one complaint that I read a lot in reviews was that people really did not like the sexual explicitness of it. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't pick up a novel with a sex worker protagonist, and I wasn't shocked by it. I was sort of waiting for the shocking sex to sort of happen, and nothing in here really shocked me. Maybe that says more about me, but I mean, honestly, to me, nothing super outrageous was happening. This to me is typical sex work. However you want to interpret that. But it is so powerful as his debut, and I loved it so much that I immediately wanted to know if he had written anything else, and he had, because it was his debut. But that brings us to our next book, which is, here it is, Love After the End, which is a collection of Two-Spirit Indigiqueer speculative fiction. It's edited by Joshua Whitehead, so he didn't write any of these stories, but he edited it, and it is such a beautiful collection. I was wowed away by it, and it is really, truly lovely collection. And it really started off with a punch, the one I will never forget for the rest of my life. It's called Abacus by, I believe, Nathan Adler, yeah. And it is set in the future, of course, and on a space station where they create these artificially intelligent rats who are supposed to sort of be your little assistants, or errand boys. So then one of the rats becomes what you would call sentient, or more sentient than his counterparts, and he's escaping, and he escapes and comes across a teenager, a teen boy living on the space station, and they sort of like become fast friends. And as I read it, I was like, where is this going? And it crossed my mind kind of early on, like, they're not gonna fall in love, are they? And I was like, no, that couldn't possibly be where Nathan Adler here is going. Spoiler, that is exactly where Nathan Adler went, and I was shocked and sort of like skeeved out. You know, it's not, you know, the rat has a hologram that they, you know, Star Trek style, they go to the holodeck, and you know, he falls in love with the hologram of a human, but the hologram is the rat, you know, projected as a hologram human. And so it's just it was a bit of a wild ride, I'll admit. Like, first story out of the gate, like, okay, let's just go there, let's just do this, you know. And I realized, like, after reading it, I was like, you know what, maybe this was intentional, not only in the part of Joshua Whitehead in terms of placement of the stories, but the author himself who wrote the story, because, you know, as I'm sure all of you might remember, the rhetoric around, you know, same-sex marriage was so ridiculous. You know, what's next? Slippery slope. Are we gonna be marrying animals or dogs? You know, things like that. And I think this author was really just like, yeah, let's see what in the future, if this slippery slope happens, what would that look like? And you know what? In the end, as kind of like shocked and a little bit horrified, I'll say, you know, as I was reading, I was like, no. In the end, it was like, it's actually such a sweet, like, innocent story. I mean, like, nothing really, like, horrific happened. I mean, would I personally want to fall in love with an AI rat? No, but at the end, I was like, yeah, let him love his little rat. The fundamental, like, disgustingness of it, I feel like the author did a fantastic job of, like, bringing us through that journey. And maybe that was just me, maybe, like, the average queer person. I'm not queer, but maybe, you know, a lot of other people wouldn't necessarily have that feeling, but I think it was pretty purposeful. You were supposed to feel a little, like, squicked out in the beginning, and then kind of realize, like, oh, it's actually not that scary. But anyway, I loved all these stories. As they kept going, they just get more and more complex and interesting, and I really appreciated all the different perspectives, and I really loved how the future, you know, I mean, this is a huge critique of Margaret Atwood and a lot of other sci-fi futuristic stories, is they're very white, they're very, like, simplistic, and these stories really grounded the indigeneity of these characters' lives into the future. Like, one story in particular I loved, like, they had a hologram of an elder telling stories. So, you know, of course, the oral tradition is pretty classic, and you would, you know, elder would tell a young person, that young person would become an elder and tell, you know, but instead of that, the futuristic version is that we just actually can record this elder doing it themselves, and then the hologram can then do that for generations to come. And I mean, you can critique that one way or the other, but I really appreciated sort of like all the beautiful aspects of Indigenous life, like, featured and highlighted in these stories. So I really love this one. There's another collection not edited by Joshua Whitehead, but it's part of this series that I really want to read as well. And I'm probably going to pick that up pretty soon. I think I bought it for my sister's birthday, and I might borrow it from her as soon as possible. Alrighty, so the next one I have is called The Lady in the Little Fox Fur by Violette Leduc. This one's French, and this one is, Violette Leduc is more famous actually for her memoir called La Bâtarde. She was born to unwed parents in 1907, so you can imagine that was not actually, like, the greatest social status. And she also is a lesbian, and that memoir sort of explores that identity and her journey on that discovery. And The Lady in the Little Fox Fur, though, is actually not explicitly queer as a story. We don't know our protagonist's sexuality. She doesn't really say anything about her past relationships, but I read it as a queer story. So it's about an elderly woman living in Paris in poverty, and she has no social relationships, and I mean none. Not even the type of relationship you would have with the boulangère, like, you go down You order a baguette every day. They know you. They can guess your order. She doesn't even have those relationships because she's that poor. She has no money to spend. She barely eats. She sells all her things to pay for absolute basic necessities. She's probably physically almost falling apart because she's so malnourished. And she just wanders, you know, she has her little schedule and she wanders the streets of Paris, and she has these relationships with objects in the city. So things like a bench or a sign, things like that. She talks to them. She feels like she knows them. Maybe it's a form of mental illness, but I actually, you know, there's multiple layers on how you can read it. And I actually heard about this story from Natalie over at Curious Readers, and I really, I heard her describe it, and I immediately wanted to pick it up because, you know, I mean, it's a little bit of a cliche, like being alone and tragically the thunder of Paris, but living in Paris, you know, it is, I don't know, because every city you feel alone, you know, and you can kind of be in a sea of people and surrounded but still be alone. But in Paris, I don't know, maybe just the French romanticize it more, but it feels so much more real in Paris. Or maybe because the experience can be beautiful even though you're alone, whereas in many other cities, it's not so beautiful because cities tend to be not super beautiful. I'm not sure, but it spoke to me. I picked it up, loved it. Long story short. So the reason I read this more as a queer story is because, you know, our protagonist is so alone and is living such a tragic existence. And this was written, I believe, in 1965. Yeah. So when Leduc was in her 50s, so she was older, and as a lesbian woman with no children, she didn't want children. She was probably thinking a lot about what her older years would look like. I think this really was her sort of playing with what it looks like as someone with no connections whatsoever, which is something the queer community has to think about a lot, whether it be from family rejection or just the fact that they don't have children. So in their much later years, they don't have any younger folks to take care for them. So yeah, that's from France, as you might guess. And and this was translated by Derek Coltman from the French. Alrighty, so the last book I have to share with you is called After the Sun by Jonas Eika, and is translated from the Danish by Sherilyn Nicolette Hellberg. I don't have a physical copy of this, so I'll just put something right here, the cover. And I also got this from the library on a whim. It was long listed for something, I don't remember what, but I just read the premise, and I thought it was interesting, so I picked it up. And it is a collection of short stories, and I'm not actually counting it for Denmark in my Read Around the World challenge because a lot of the stories are not set in Denmark, and it's not, to me, very clear that even some of the protagonists are even Danish. So I just read that more for fun rather than the Read Around the World challenge. And a couple of the stories I really, really enjoyed and felt like I fully understood. A couple of them I didn't necessarily understand all the way. Still enjoyed them, but I kind of had the feeling that I definitely was missing the full understanding that is needed. Since I listened to it on audio, sometimes I just really feel like I need to look at the written word, and for a couple of those stories that was the case. So I really want to pick up a copy and reread those stories. But there were two stories that were sort of companion pieces set in Mexico with Beach Boys as our protagonist. I am not a beach person, so I didn't really know this was a thing, but you can sort of go to the beach and pre-tip someone so that they're sort of at your beck and call to bring you things, and then also maybe some sex work on the side. This book actually won a Nordic Literature Council Prize, and as I was preparing for this video, I stumbled across it, and I watched actually Jonas Eika give his acceptance speech, which was, wow, vicious. It really called out, you know, the first two lines were like, you know, thank you to my loved ones, and I'm, you know, without them, I couldn't write this book. And then the rest of the speech was basically just denouncing the Danish government for its poor treatment of migrants and poor people. It was really like just astounding to listen to. Like I was so like pumped for it because he called out specifically the Danish Prime Minister, who was sitting in the audience, like watching the speech. So like he was very nervous. You could tell like he was like, oh crap, I won. But he said it, and he said what he had to say, and it was It was glorious, actually. And so I'll link that below if you want to check it out. It's 5 minutes. It's really quick, but after I saw that speech, I was like, for sure, I need to reread some of these stories, because like I knew that there was like a sort of class element to them. It was definitely like critique of capitalism, very clear in some of the stories. But I want to now reread that with like fresh eyes, knowing that the author is like this intense about his critiques and integrating it into his art and his literary persona. So anyway, that is the last book I have to share. I really hope you found maybe one or two that piqued your interest and you want to check out. And until next time, bye.